Hello everyone, and welcome back. Today in the workshop we have, this is just a green Japanese maple. Not to understate it or anything, it's a common green leaf Japanese maple. I didn't have one in my collection, and I was lucky enough to find this one. It's got a really nice trunk, it's got really nice nabari, and if you remember last year we transplanted it into this growing container and we cut all the tops off and let it do its thing this past growing season. Now that everything is established on this tree, we've got to do some decision making so we can figure out the dominant side of the tree versus a subordinate side of the tree. We need to start selecting all of our branches that we're going to retain and eliminate the ones that we're not. So let's go ahead and get started with the discussion. This tree is doing very well. I don't necessarily like the fact that it's got this Y here, almost like a slingshot approach, but I do like the fact that we have two trunks here, and then this one is kind of its own singular trunk. When you look at the tree and you follow it up, to me when you look at this tree and you follow it up from the bottom up, for whatever reason my eye tends to follow this trunk line more than it follows this trunk line, so I'm thinking this may be the main trunk and this will be the subordinate side when it comes to this tree. I have a spacer up here that last year I screwed into here to create some space in between these two. I like the way that this trunk has a tendency to move this way, and then we were able to bend it out so it has a little bit more interest in movement. This side having two has a lot of interest here as well. Not real sure 100% what we're going to do as far as keeping which one. This one is thicker higher up, so that tells me that this tends to be leaning this one to be more of the dominant trunk than this one here as well. At one point in time I was contemplating cutting this trunk all the way off and just keeping this portion of the tree, cutting this off and having a line that comes up like this to here and then to here. But after looking at it, I thought that that might be a feasible option for the tree, but there would be a ginormous scar on there that would take quite some time to heal. And I don't really have any multiple trunk, if you will, trees, so I decided to keep it as it is, as a multiple trunked tree. Let's go ahead and get started with the basics. Obviously, the first things that we're going to want to eliminate is anything growing inwards or across anything. So, for instance, these two down here, it's growing back towards this direction. Anything on the inside of these two, like these here, this here, we left them on last year to give more energy into root development, but now that that's transpired, it's not really necessary. So we need to go through here and kind of eliminate anything like that for this season. Come back in here, take care of these two. Also, anything growing downward, we need to go ahead and address and take care of now. Anything like this where there's a big cluster, we need to eliminate it all the way down to one. Since this branch is going to be another trunk possibly, or another dominant branch, I'm going to be keeping the largest outward growing one. and eliminating the remaining ones. So we're keeping this one. Anything is too far down on the tree to be of any use. Same situation over here, we've got a cluster of them growing here. And so we need to weed out the ones that we're going to keep, or weed out the ones we're not going to keep, I should say. Before we get too much into the top portion of this tree, I want to look at what I want to do as far as possible trunk chop. You can't have both of these at the same height like they are now. We just did that intentionally to give us options this spring. Need to try to kind of make a decision on what we're going to do to retain. One of them is going to have to be higher than the other one. One of them's going to have to be the dominant, the other's going to have to be the subordinate. I kind of like the idea of maybe keeping this one as the dominant and chopping this one back, because this one's really concentrated on this side, and maybe structure-wise, canopy-wise, I don't know. I'm just waiting for the tree to tell me what it wants to do, really. I've been looking at it and looking at it and looking at it and thinking about doing it one way, thinking about doing it another way. Haven't really been able to come up with a real final decision on how I want to go about it. Was possibly thinking about doing something kind of drastic. I'm still thinking of it. Kind of clue you in on what I'm thinking here. I've got this branch here in the back. I've got this branch here in the front. They're alive. They're fairly healthy. The tips died off on this one last year. I've got another smaller one here as well. I was thinking about possibly eliminating this whole chunk down to this in the back branch and growing, orienting this branch in a more upright position to be the next, because there's really nothing in between here and here, and then you got this big wad out here. So I'm thinking if I cut clear back to here, that might be a good transition point, and bring this up and grow this out through here. If I did that, then I could possibly cut this one back to this branch here, so it really shortens and compacts this side of the tree. I've got some back branches right here opposite of where I would be cutting this one at. I've got another branch down here lower that I could train out this way as well. And again, not a whole lot of taper or interest in this portion of the tree. It's just a long pole where I could create taper if I came clear back to here. So I'm going to mark these as we talk, and more than likely that's the route we're going to take. I say I'm going to mark these, but I don't have a marking instrument here, so that's okay. I know what I'm talking about. So, and then if I do that, if I bring this section down to here, and I bring this section down to here, that opens me up to bring this portion back to here. And by doing that, now we've created a situation where we've compacted the tree down quite a bit. I've got all these branches here on this side of the tree that I can utilize for making more trunks, if you will. More trunking, or more main branches / tertiary trunks. I've got some in the back here where I would grow out as well. So I see this tree somewhere in this size when it's at its final stage. I don't really have a whole lot of back budding or branching on this side, which I think that if I was to cut it back more, maybe I could get some dormant budding through this area to happen. And honestly, overall, I think it would be a better tree if I did that. This is still would remain as the dominant trunk of the tree. And I've got this one and this one here and here. Like I said, maybe I could take this one clear back to here, which is even a better idea, I think. Maybe clear back to here, because I've got a branch directly behind it back here. I could go from here to here on this one, from here to here on this one, and from here to here on this one. I think that would make a lot better tree in the long run. Gives me more room to get more ramification. So I think that's what we're going to end up doing. So let's get at it. I believe I've got this one here. I can get it with this here. Now that's a pretty significant amount of removal. But I wanted to do that because I think had I done that previous to waiting a year, you can see the amount of dieback I got here. Okay. Didn't get as much on this one, but I wanted some branches to be established on those trunk parts because they were bare, if you remember last year. So I wanted to get some branching established on the rest of it before I went ahead and did a major structural chop, just to make sure we had something that wouldn't die all the way back to the base of the trunk. So now this is what we're left with. And to be quite honest, I like it. I really like it the way it looks now. I'm glad that I did that where I was going to. Now it's just a matter of carving some transition in these. And we're not going to carve with any power tools, we're just going to use hand tools. Bringing this all back down to where the live veining is. So when we lay our cut paste on this year, it's going to be a little bit thicker. So we can hopefully get some scar tissue to develop. Good. And I'm going to start putting some of this sealant on these now, because it is getting, well, number one, it's raining outside pretty good. I don't know if you can hear the rain in the camera or not, but I want this stuff to scab over before I stick it back out in the rain, or else the rain's just going to wash it off. And we're getting to a point where spring's coming, and these are going to start bleeding sap. We're not doing it right now, but you know, a couple weeks from now they probably will be. So make sure I get a nice thick layer of this on here now. So we don't have any more dieback on the back side of this tree. Keeps those cut sites that we just opened up moist. And we can go ahead and work on the final transitional point, which is this one right here. Now if you were noticing when I went through this one again, I didn't go real deep into the cambrium that was still alive. I just skirted the edge of it. If I would have gone back deep into the cambrium again instead of skirting the edge, see, the tree's compartmentalized itself to there as a stopping point. If I would have gone beyond that again, then would have had to have recompartmentalized down lower, and you're just going to end up chasing the wound all the way down the trunk potentially. So we don't want to do that. So I just went right to the edge of where it was at, and then I'm putting that cut paste on there which has hormones to tell it, hey, you need to callus now. So we're going to do the same thing with this one here. Yeah, pretty much stayed just about where it was. It's a good sign. But it does have kind of a raised, it's got a rounded profile instead of a concave profile, so we need to concave it so eventually when all this does callus and heal over, it doesn't have a gnarly bump there. It's got a smooth transition. One thing I've noticed with using this Keyano cut paste is if you put a thin layer on, I don't know why, but on a lot of trees, if you put a thin layer on like I did on this one last year, you get some dieback. If you put it on real thick like I'm doing right now, it'll start callusing underneath this cut stuff, and it pushes it off eventually. It'll completely pop it all the way off. Especially on these large cuts. Now these small teeny cuts that normally I wouldn't put cut paste on, you really don't have to, but I'm going to just because. But I'm just going to do a thin layer on those, because those are not too big of a deal. Alright, now while that's scabbing over, we're going to go ahead and do some wiring on this tree so we can place our branches / tertiary trunks into position and get them where they need to be. So when they start doing their extension growth this spring and summer, thickening up, they'll already be in the position that they belong in for the, so we're not fighting them next year when they're too thick. Happy with that. Whenever you can, you try to wire two branches together with the same wire. Unfortunately, sometimes you can't, like this one down here. When you do, when I do these down here, you can see it's kind of loose around here. I always try to get at least two wraps around the trunk before I come up the branch, because that will help stabilize the wire. And whenever I can as well, I always try to start the wire behind where I'm wiring, so it's hidden from view. Pretty satisfied with that. This one here in the front, because this is the very end, if this dies back, I've got this one as a backup. If this one starts growing, I'm going to be cutting this one off in the spring. Let me go ahead and zoom in on this so you can kind of see where we stand. Maybe a little bit hard. I think that right there is probably pretty good. I've got some little ones here that are going to be just left to grow because they're so small right now you can't really wire them. There's one here, same thing. It'll eventually come up and fill this area in. This one here is the top. If it dies, I've got this one as a backup that I can wire up into position. I've got two in the back over here on the back side for the same reason. Alright, there we have it. Got some interest in the branches now. None of them are straight up and down. They've all got some gentle sweeping curves and some movement, not only side to side but forward to back, which when they get thicker will help out tremendously. I think we'll be in good shape. I'm going to leave this in here for a few hours because it is, again, raining pretty profusely out there, and just allow the cut paste to set so that way when rain hits it, it doesn't soften it up and wash it away. But let's hit it with a 360 now that we got it back to where it belongs. Now this one as well, since it's the second year, is going to get hammered hard with nitrogen-based fertilizer this year. I'm just going to pour it to it, and it's going to cause two things to take place. Number one, it's going to cause more back budding to be profusely on here, so I'm going to kind of have to keep everything in check. But number two, it's going to make every single one of these that we've wired today extend growth profusely. So I'm going to have to be really cautious on this thing about the wire. I'm going to have to keep the wire from scarring in too much. Now the majority of these here, at first I want the wire to scar in just slightly to set the branch, because these branches, these new tops, and this one here especially, is going to have to get to at least half as thick as this again. So about, if that's thumb size, this has to get to at least index finger size to be in scale with the rest of what's going on with this tree. So I want the wire to cut in, just start to cut into it, just not to wrap around the wire. I don't want the cambrium to wrap around the wire, but I want the wire to set into the branch so it almost looks like a indentation when the wire comes off. That tells me that that branch is set in that position. And then from there on, I'll let it grow profusely, and it'll thicken up in 2 to 3 years to something almost this size, because the amount of fertilizer I'm going to pour onto it. And same thing goes with all of these. And then what we'll do again is we'll cut those back, and then we'll get more branching from those, and that's where our tertiary branching will come from. So this is the skeletal structure, if you will. This was the primary skeletal structure, and this is the secondary. So like this is your torso and your arms, where these are going to kind of be your, I guess, your wrists and your hands, and then from there you develop your fingers. So let's hit this with a 360. We'll get it back out on the bench, and we'll do another update maybe late spring, early summer on it, and we'll see how she goes from there. Thanks for watching.